Councilmember DeGolia,
Yep.
Councilmember Hawkins,
Here.
and Councilmember Holland.
Here.
And I'll note for the record that we have two excused absences from Councilmember Whitmer and Councilmember Lewis.
Okay, so now we are taking public comment for anything on the. Great. So then the first item on our agenda is talking storm.
Thank you, Vice Mayor, members of the council. I'm going to give a brief overview of the staff report and turn it over to our consultant team to provide you with the presentation. Then we'll be available to answer questions. So what we're hoping to do tonight is to provide you with an overview of the initial investigations along El Camino Real in terms of what's out there and some potential solutions that we might be able to implement. Reminder, this is related to the long-term drainage improvements along El Camino Real. And so the town issued a request for proposals and entered into an agreement with Fryer and Loretta to develop a conceptual outline of potential drainage solutions along El Camino Real. Fryer and Loretta tag teamed with our project manager, Douglas Kim, who is also helping us oversee the El Camino Real Complete Streets project, so that we can make sure that as the projects move forward, they can kind of dovetail together, and what we are looking at are longer term solutions rather than shorter term solutions that might go away with the future improvements along El Camino Real. And so Fryer and Loretta completed their initial investigations, including reviewing, doing field walks, field investigation, photographic records. They also were able to get the topographic data that was collected as part of the El Camino Real Complete Streets project to supplement the data record search that they also did. And as we look towards solutions, we're kind of looking at kind of southern end and northern end. The only real drainage improvement that we have in this stretch that is of substantial size really is the Atherton Channel. And so it crosses El Camino, as you know, from behind Carton Field and jogs over and goes down Watkins Avenue, ultimately connecting up with the Bayfront Canal and discharging out to the bay. South of that, there is a drainage system, a drain line that collects stormwater along El Camino from Valparaiso, basically towards the channel. North of that, there really isn't much infrastructure. There's a couple of culverts and some other drainage features that Eric will highlight as he goes through the presentation. But there's nothing that is substantially connected or available directly to collect and take that stormwater away. Eric will highlight there is a catch basin and a piece of pipe at Selby. Later this month, there's a TV inspection that's going to go on to actually see how far, how big, and collect that data. But as far as the record research goes, and I think some of the council members are aware, it's walled off and not connected to anything. And so in essence,
Say that again.
it's walled off and
So there's
as
a
far as
catch
we know,
basin at Selby that goes
nowhere.
north, but it's shut off.
Well, I say the investigation I saw is that there's a pipe that goes, I guess, eastbound towards the county, but I don't know how far. And there's no evidenced infrastructure on the east side of El Camino that shows where that would go. And so that's part of the investigation that we'll be continuing on. And so as Eric goes through the presentation, he's going to start initially focusing on that southern end and then migrating towards the north Okay, so it's a brief introduction. So this is Eric Belen from Friar and Loretta.
Thank you so much, Robert. Can everyone hear me? So thank you for having us here. As Robert mentioned, short presentation, bring you up to speed. Found out. We're not going to share all the headaches, but pretty much what I'm looking for is hopefully some additional direction where the field down. Yeah, there's some stuff that costs a lot of money that can get done. There's other much partial to that if we slide. We're a nice small group here, so if you do have questions, we'd interrupt. But we're basically going to go down and talk about the existing drainage system, flooding that has been recorded, kind of impacts that we have or that we're concerned with all, and add actions that fleshed out. My favorite thing, which is cost. Yeah. Around here. Good. Next slide, please. So this graphic shows that the general topography of the town and drainage tends to be from 280 side down to the El Camino. Crosses El Camino and then it goes off towards the east. And the largest, as Robert mentioned, the largest drainage system through Atherton Channel, and that's that blue line that you see going from right. Our concern for the time being is the highlighted yellow line, which is the El Camino. And part of the problem is there's not a whole lot of storm drain infrastructure from Atherton Channel. I'm just going to use, it's not really north, it's north and southeast and stuff, but I'm going to just pretend that the El Camino runs north and south. Talk about left and right, up and down. And so when you look at this, the general topography is from 280 down to El Camino, and then also from Valparaiso north. You've got this table that's kind of tilted at an angle. That's where the water tends to want to go. Next slide, please. Okay, so this graphic shows you just the El Camino.
Wait, can you go back to the last one?
Sure. Yeah.
So the white drains to Bay Road. Is that right? And what about the section that is north of the Atherton Channel and east of El Camino Real? There's a little bit that you've got colored that drains to the Atherton Channel, but there's that whole section from the northern border of Atherton. It's white and.
Okay, so I think the area that you're alluding to predominantly is, let's say, the Lloyden Park neighborhood.
Yeah, you just left the map. Yeah, that.
Yeah, so you have the Lloyden
it's-
Park. Yeah, so you have the Lloyden Park neighborhood.
More than Lloyden Park. Lloyden
yeah.
Park is
I'll
obviously.
hit that. I'll hit it up a piece at a time. So we have the Lloyden Park neighborhood, which has a discharge point that goes out from behind Snowden.
Sorry, can you point to it
along-
with your cursor for us?
It's
that
the
are
green
not-
line.
So there's a green line just to the right of where it says El Camino Real.
Okay,
So that line collects water from the Lloyd Park neighborhood. It goes out behind Snowden along the rail tracks, and then it dumps into the back of a catch basin in San Mateo County on Loyola. To the right of that, most of that drains towards Middlefield. And so there is a small section of green that goes to the north of Marsh. And so there's drains in Middlefield, pretty much from the Fair Oaks intersection that go towards the channel at Marsh. So to answer your question, it's kind of split partially towards the Atherton channel and then partially towards the county.
Okay. Yeah, that answers my question.
Great.
Walk through all the other colors just for my,
I didn't understand what
Education.
the,
so the blue has nothing. It all goes
go
to El
back.
Camino. Sorry.
Good.
Well, more my, so let me just, the blue specifically, all the water from Selby Lane to El Camino in that blue section gets sent down to El Camino.
So I guess you're talking about the shaded purple
Yes.
area?
Purpley blue.
Yeah, so that area generally drains towards El Camino.
Ah.
And ultimately El Camino supposedly flows towards the north.
Again, that's going to, the table is tilted like this,
Right,
that.
yeah, okay. Got it.
And when I say tilted, it's flat as a pancake.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
So
Oh,
it's
standing
it's
water.
tilted, you know, there's actually quite a bit of grade differential when you look at entire mile that
Yeah.
you're looking at. It's like, oh, okay, there's like 20 feet of fall, but 20 feet of fall over a mile, flat as a pancake. So
The
So-
area left on the image, west of Selby Lane, drains to that north-south Selby Lane. And there's drainage, of course, there's drainage infrastructure on Selby, right? Where
there-
Cohina's comes in. And
There's a small
Huh.
system there.
some. So
And the red line down Selby Lane is,
a ditch.
It's pretty much swale surface flow. There's a small drain line that runs, I'll call it on the west end of Selby. But there's no large storm drainage system, and that's why we have the problems that we have on Selby.
Interesting.
where the red lines, that's swales.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly as a swale?
just a shallow,
Is it cemented swale or is it
usually not.
usually not?
And in these cases, they're simply soil. Yeah, think of, when we say swale, think of kind of like the drainage you see in a parking lot, kind of comes down to a little concrete thing, takes it away.
It's created swales or are they just naturally occurring from having water go down that side of that street?
I'll say it varies substantially. And keep in mind, when we're talking about these swales, it's people's frontages. And so some of them are more pronounced than others. Others just have it kind of almost flat.
You have a whole set of rules around what person can do in the front of their
Yes.
house pertaining to water. Has that done anything good in terms of up with how the swale got made piecemeal by the people?
I can't say.
Yeah,
So I say, why don't we move on towards,
Question, I'm sorry.
okay.
The purple area that's flowing to El Camino, there's a few like dots.
Yeah.
That,
Those are likely dry wells. And so basically figure a catch basin that doesn't have a concrete bottom.
Yeah.
So water will get collected and kind of slowly seep into the ground.
Are those ones we built? Is this city infrastructure we're talking
Yes.
about in the case of the green, but not
Yeah.
in case of the swales?
Most of the swales have been there for,
So that's just
Decades.
private people frontage, but
yeah,
the green dots are stuff we actually built.
yes.
Not just us, but sometimes
Private people.
dry wells. Yeah, anybody can put in a dry well.
So, but these aren't dry wells on people's land. These are dry wells on the end of the street, right? This is part
Well,
of the
the end of the
street.
street is people's land, so.
So again, our focus was on Camino. I know that all the rest of this stuff, because it flows to us, right? It flows to El Camino. When it gets to the El Camino, there's a hump across the street. And so that's part of the reason here, because flooding that occurs along the El Camino is occasioned by the fact that have very flat topography and the fact that we have very poor filtrations in our soils. Clay, adobe clay soils suck. The infiltration goes. And so we get ponding and it just stays there. When we looked at, as Robert mentioned, we looked at a bunch of historical records. We looked at what Caltrans said they built in 1941 and 90s. And then we went out in the field to go verify. There's what you're seeing here is a summary of both what we know is out in the field, plus county records, plus trans records. And for example, you'll see the purple highlighted area right in the middle there. Caltrans said that they built that section, but they didn't. We went out there and we verified that they didn't. Then we looked at their as-built again. There's a little note that said, yeah, no, we're not going to, even though it says as-built on the plan set, it goes, yeah, no, we're not going to build this because we ran into a bunch of utilities and forget it. So you look at this and you go, man, there's not a whole lot of infrastructure to handle the amount of ponding that we get at the end of this. If you keep this mental picture, we'll go to the next slide, please. So there's already been a storm drainage study, the townwide storm drainage study. They identified with little red teardrops places of concern, places where they've seen, yeah, we went out there in December last month when it was pouring rain just to verify what we could see. And sure, the purple dots are kind of went, as well as where the recorded areas were. And yeah, it's flooded. You can see it in the photos. There's ponding all over the place. So the topography out there, like I mentioned, is the Atherton Channel is a low spot because it's where everything is. Then as you get towards Isabella, Atherton Avenue, you're sloping the other way. So there's a mild grade that goes towards Redwood City. Looked at this. There's really nothing that would push the water over into some of these systems. There are some culverts that cross El Camino. Most of them are way undersized for a storm drain system. And they're almost cobbled together. So
Almost what?
Almost cobbled together. For example, there's not a good head wall. There's not a good discharge point. You look at some of these photos and you go, wow, that thing crosses El Camino, amazing. A little pipe like this going through. And when you get smaller pipes, they tend to clog all the time. So maintenance hassle, yeah, you could make it work, but you're going to be flushing this thing constantly. Kind of defeats the purpose. Go to the next slide. So we're looking at this and some of the issues that were predominantly part of analysis was safety was number one. Gee, it's this ponding, this flooding is a mess for pedestrians, for bikers that are driving. And looking for solutions, we weren't just looking for one solution that covered everything. We're looking for how much of the system can we address, and then there's going to be some outlier points that we're going to pick up in other ways. So that was the guidance of what we did. Was we said try and get as much of a chunk as we possibly can, and then for outlying areas, it's not really worth trying to get infrastructure all the way out, but we'll see what we can do. So with all that having been said, I'll spend a little bit of time on this slide. One of the challenges, if you have enough money and time, you could probably build anything you want, but constructability is a big issue. So especially with existing infrastructure, you're dealing with gas lines, sewer lines, water lines, sorts of stuff. So when we're walking through the logic of what would be a good alternative, we're considering constructability. Can't build it, what's the point? Next one is cost. So trying to be sensitive to how much all this stuff costs to put in. We're looking at environmental impacts, and because of the regulations that we have with the water board, there's also a trash capture and water quality component to the system. And for this case, we're saying, oh, wait, there's going to be an improvement, eventually. So we wanted to take that into account by not building something that's going to get ripped out in 10 years, 15 years, stuff. So the obvious thing is to say, well, let's just build this. You don't even have to do dewatering. You could just do a brand new storm drain system. Wouldn't that be great? Problem with the storm drain system, there's a bunch of problems with the storm drain system. One is it's flat. And it doesn't help you to build a storm drain system along El Camino when it can't go anywhere. So you would solve the problem on El Camino and you're going to flood your immediate downstream. Permanent solutions for storm drain systems start at the bay, work their way back. So if you don't have a capacity in your storm drain system all the way out to the bay, you have to build back from there. You can't build a segment upstream. Flooding. They learned that when they did a grade separation in San Carlos, and there was flooding on the west side railroad tracks. Put in the grade separation, all of a sudden now water could flow east side, and ended up flooding that neighborhood. So after the lawsuits were settled, people on the west side set up a sinking fund for the people on the east side to buy flood insurance. So you just can't make it go away. You have to get all the way to a point of. So we looked at the storm drain system, also said, wow, there's a lot of utility conflicts. You're going to have to try and put in a fairly large pipe. It's already existing sanitary sewer. It's in the way. One of the catch basins that we talked about at Selby that has a pipe that we don't know where it goes to. It may have been cut by the sanitary sewer. So again, there's all sorts of with a storm drain system, and the fact that we wouldn't be able to take it on the east side to anywhere that makes any sense. We looked at infiltration wells. Those are fairly low maintenance. It's kind of like those green dots. So you make them any size you want. But in clay soils, we get back to poor drainage. And if you're looking to dewater, great. If you could keep that infiltration well unused until the storm's over and then let the remainder go in. But what happens? The storm comes, this thing fills up fairly quickly, and then you still end up with. So infiltration wells are great for periodic dewatering when you don't have to deal with storm drainage rolling over. You think you've got a really big trench. Well, when you're talking about cubic feet per second of release of storm drain, it fills up super fast. And then just a hole in the ground. It's just a bathtub waiting to be drained. So we looked at passive systems, and then we went to a more active system. That's where we came. But that's where we're looking at a positive system with a pump, saying, all right, well, where can we take this water after the storm has passed, all this flooding, all this ponding? And the most obvious choice is back to the Atherton Channel. That has plenty of capacity. Doesn't have capacity during around a 1 hour peak flow. So when a storm of a certain size through, Atherton Channel's at full tilt. Can't take any more water. That spike capacity only lasts for around an hour or two, just because of the way that things drain to the. But with that in mind, we go, geez, this thing's got capacity % of the time. So if we can simply figure out how to pump into it after the storm, during the storm, and then after the storm, just so that we're not impacting the peak, then we can take all this surface drainage, put in DIs, drainage inlets, and take them to a small lift station and pump it up. Again, we're not building something that's a storm water system. It's a dewatering system. This thing will take down puddles and everything. See, along the El Camino. We also thought of it in terms of if there are going to be improvements to the El Camino, what would it mean to already have a dewatering system in place? Well, when everyone goes to do the green infrastructure for the roadways, medians, the greenscape and stuff like that, that's part of that is required as water quality treatment by the water board. Doesn't do you any good, doesn't have an underdrain system. Underdrain system here wouldn't go. So this would allow this dewatering system, so could also play a role in the infrastructure of the El Camino when it gets built, drain in to have all their BMPs, best management drainage basins and stuff, drain into a system that takes that water. So we go, so now you're getting, yeah,
Just to lay audience so that I understand the terms.
sure.
Talking about a system, are you talking about pipes with a pump actually moving the system,
Yes.
actually moving the water?
Yes.
And when you talk about a storm drain system, are you talking about just a pipe system again? But this time there's not a pump involved and it's based on gravity?
Yes. So most storm drain systems try to avoid as much as possible. Those are mechanical features that. So they put in a pump station. Really just have to when you run out of gravity.
So is the only difference between these two columns, the pump, they both have a drainage pipe system?
I'm sorry, what was the question again?
The storm drain system and the watering system infrastructure other than the pump are the same?
No, in terms of, so there are similarities, right? So there are inlets and discharge points. But for a storm drain system, you're talking about an order of magnitude height. So for a storm drain system, you're normally looking at 18s, 24s, 36s
Pipe.
for the pipe, big pipe, because it comes at you really fast and then you have to take it someplace. Watering, what we looked at, and that's why you see the 24. Well, we looked at it and we go, okay, if I had a house in Atherton, and I had to drive along the streets, how long after storm would I want to have things kind of cleared out? I said, probably an hour. Sounds about right. So we looked at there's a bunch of variables that go into this, but we looked at the different pipe sizes. You know, what's the smallest pipe we can kind of get away? And it actually could be smaller than the 12-inch line that there's velocities involved, how fast you can draw down and things. But there's a maintenance part of it as well. 12 inches makes it pretty easy to jet the line. Get it to 8 inches, kind of.
Guys, that was inches of pipe, so thank you, that clarified. Now, the infiltration wells, is that what we're used to hearing about when they talk about green infrastructure? And it's like the things we have at the library? And
Yep.
so those are so that's the same as green infrastructure?
It's considered part of a treatment train. So it's one tool that are considered low impact development, green.
So you're saying you looked at all these three approaches and the dewatering system made the most sense because you'd be able. But the problem was you said there's 1 hour when providing more than our own canal. Do we have a method of turning it off so that we don't flood the canal for all the houses in that 1 hour? So the system's set up to mechanically stop
Yes.
when the canal reaches a peak, it has sensors that says stop. And then when it goes back down, it opens again. Is that how it works?
Yeah. Taking my job.
Hardly.
No.
Scrambling to
But
understand
no,
the words.
no, that is how it works. So there's a couple of reasons why it works that way. Okay. There's a couple of reasons why it works that way. One is because we don't want to impact the channel when it's at full breaking point. The other one is you run into all sorts of regulatory issues. Try and push water in. You're adding to the problem. Okay? If you're going to add to the problem, now you're going to be doing a FEMA study all the way out to the bay and halfway up the hill to prove that your base flood elevation hasn't been impacted. In this case, we do a song and dance, say, yeah, no, channel has plenty of capacity, 95%. So we're going to make it so there's a float there that says water level is as high as we want. Some capacity channel. Yeah, the pump station is not going to pump. Why is that? Because it's raining like cats and dogs anyway. There's rain all over the place. So you're going to get ponding and flooding, stuff like that.
That's a stupid question.
Yeah.
If you're counting on this float to turn it off, now we're adding a new set. What is our liability, or what would happen if that flow malfunctioned or adding all that extra water in our canal? Do we have an idea of what would be the worst case scenario? What would happen if that didn't turn off for that hour?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. The regulatory answer is that we would add to peak flow of the channel. Practical answer to that is it wouldn't make a whit of difference. Why? Because when Atherton Channel is flowing full, oh, thank you. Appreciate it, Eric. When Atherton Channel is flowing full, it's 800 CFS coming at you or more. Okay. We're talking about dewatering at 200 to 300 gallons per minute. 1 CFS is 448 GPM, gallons per minute. So it's of 1% added to the flow, wouldn't even know. You couldn't tell. Okay. But from a regulatory point of view, doing an analysis for FEMA up and down the channel, because got to show base flood elevation. So this graphic kind of shows that, yeah, you're going to get a storm. Most of it is going to go away through existing storm drain system, overland release, which we have already discussed is not really very existent. And then when the storm passes, you end up with all this localized flooding. And then the pump station is there and it's looking at the float and it's going, are we there yet? Are we good? Are we good? Okay. If the level float says, yeah, everything's okay, then we're pumping. And it keeps asking that question until we get to the point where the channel comes down. Now the pumping is going to start well before the channel gets acted. So there's a benefit to that. But again, with significant storm rain events, you're not going to notice the difference of a couple of hundred GPM channel. But this is what we tell any of the regulators who are interested is, no, we've got it figured out. We're not going to affect your channel.
Wait, just to,
Yeah.
So what you're saying is when it's plugged, water will stay in the pipe and in the puddles. And when it's unplugged, the puddles go away. So we're not putting like a giant underground or any kind of,
Yep.
okay.
Yeah. It's just a hole in the ground with a couple of pumps.
But you're showing that with, for example, an 18-inch pipe, there'd be 12,500 cubic feet of water pumped over what time?
Around an hour.
An hour?
Around an hour.
And how much would that pipe hold?
In terms of?
Well, you've got a pipe and
Let me
you've got some kind of a container that the water's flowing from the pipe into where the pump is, right?
Yeah.
And what's the aggregate amount of
And that's the numbers that he has on the chart. If you go back a slide, Anthony.
yeah, I'm looking at
Yeah,
that.
so basically what we have on that slide is the
Stored
storage
volume.
over the length of line for a 12-inch pipe. It'll hold about 4,800 cubic feet. An 18-inch line would hold about
I
9,300.
can see that. And what is the pumped volume? That's over what period of time?
Around an hour.
An hour. And do you have any judgment as to what the amount of water is that would accumulate on El Camino, given whatever parameters you choose?
Yeah, we looked at, we took a look at how much ponding and the volume of ponding, surface ponding
Okay.
have. So based on that, we said, okay, the total volume pumped during that hour would draw down the puddles below the surface elevation. So basically the puddles go away and then it could keep pumping and out the pipe and stuff like that.
So if I understand what you just said, your analysis is a 12-inch pipe would eliminate the puddles in an hour of pumping.
Yes. Yeah, and we also looked at, so when you're pumping at a certain rate, right? Pumping at a certain rate, you're pulling the water through the pipe at a certain velocity. And for a storm drain system, you want to do 2 feet per second. Kind of, it's considered a good practice for scour velocity, meaning things kind of stay suspended and silt kind of flows. Because once you get it to the pump, it can go out. Pumps can usually handle around 3-inch solids. So leaves and all that stuff. But if you're pumping slower than that,
Slower
It-
than 2 cubic feet a second?
slower than 2 feet per second.
2
So
feet?
we're talking about how it flows through the pipe. So 2 feet per second in a 12-inch pipe is a quarter of the volume, something that's goes by the square. So your velocity would drop to a quarter of what you have. So now we want things to move, right? So if we were to put in a 24-inch pipe, then it impacts the size of the pump. So now you're putting in bigger pumps, more expensive pumps. So we're trying to balance the cost of what we're doing, how much time it takes, how well things flow through the pipe, minimize the amount of jetting and stuff and cleaning we'd have to do for maintenance. So all those variables looks like simple numbers. Have all that consideration. Sense?
Yeah, no,
Okay.
that's good. And so there's sort of two questions that I've had. One is
Sure.
whole piping and pumping issue, and the other is the infiltration well. I mean, we currently have a bunch of infiltration wells in the area. I don't know how many, but I know there's dry wells and they get filled up pretty quick.
Yes.
So the question is, well, are they getting filled up so quickly because they're not large enough or they're not deep enough?
They're getting filled up because water goes into basically a gravel hole. And then it tries to get through the soil, and the soil has clay in it, and clay doesn't let it go.
Which says to me that the drilling didn't go below the clay. So at some
You're-
point you can get below the clay. Sure.
Yeah, like I
Okay,
said,
I'm not,
You got
I'm
below
not,
the clay at my house at 20 feet, but some,
okay,
yeah, I was
different-
saying,
different
most
area.
of most of the infiltration wells that we have aren't that deep.
yeah.
Okay, we'll have a catch basin that's about 3-4 feet deep. And then it's probably another 5 or 6 feet of gravel.
Yeah, but my question is, well, how valuable would it be if it was 200 feet deep? And
great question, right? So go 200 feet deep, and now you get into different aquifers, right? Now you've got all sorts of regulatory people on your, asking
Yeah.
you questions like, you're not supposed to put a hole in the ground that can possibly contaminate water tables.
Yeah, there's a regulatory requirement that for infiltration wells, you have to be at least 10 feet above the water table. And
Yeah, but-
so,
but that there's some, I mean, I'm sure can be determined how far the water table is.
yeah, no, we can test it and we can find it. The question is how quickly do we want to get rid of this water? Right. And so if we're relying on infiltration wells, it'll
be-
take the first surface flows. I'm not necessarily worried about that. And so your moderate storms, it'll take it. You'll have a little bit of ponding for a while and then it'll dissipate. But we all know that the infiltration wells that we have around town is that the reality is that during a moderate event, which is what we're really worried about, water will come in, the first waters will go into the infiltration well, fill it up. And then every drop after that is ponding, flooding, et cetera. And we're now talking about a day or so for that water to dissipate. Which right now, I think what we have is probably about 2 days worth of time for the water to sink into the ground.
Yeah, but we've got
Average.
whatever, 3 to 5 foot deep dry wells. So if we had 200 feet, if we had 200 feet
I mean,
deep dry wells.
we can certainly investigate them and they can be part of the solution. But I don't I don't think we want to allude that they are going to be the solution because they are slow draining and they are limited by size. The other aspect is depending on where and how we put them, the improvements along El Camino Real will rip them out, or at least rip out that top portion of it. And what we want, ideally, I think, is when we look at long-term solutions, is something that we can piggyback on in the future. And so that's part of it. And like I said, one of the things that we're looking for really is this kind of conversation and direction. Do we want to do something smaller, a little less expensive that will not drain the water as fast, but drain it faster than it is now? Or do we want to try and do something that provides a real noticeable difference? Because if you ask a resident, it's like, okay, well, the intersection is now ponded for 2 days. If we make improvements and it's still ponded for a day, does that really provide that tangible benefit that they're looking for? Right? And so that's kind of the balance that we have to look at, is how much is enough in terms of improvement? Is it going to be noticeable? Right? And we want, as we take care, what we want to do is take care of the problem as cost effectively and efficiently as we can. The real problem is what we're talking about is a mile stretch of roadway where there's really no outlet for things to go.
Another part of that though, just how soon? Like I'm 100%, first of all, I absolutely love that we're looking at this. I've lived here 30 years and
Yeah.
I wanted this to happen. So I'm all in. But my question is, this project, in every manner you look at it, it's way out in the future. We're facing storms coming up this winter, next
Yeah,
winter.
no, there's storms that come every winter.
So what I'm
and-
trying to say is, yes, we want the big solution, but have we looked at smaller solutions that will give some amount of relief? So for example, did we look at the idea of doing some infiltration on our streets? Because also we can't even touch this without this whole political vehicle of going and talking and getting. So on our streets, we can do stuff. What if we were, and it's just hypothetical, I don't know what I'm talking about, but if on the ends of our streets where we have the puddling in the interim, so I'm not saying don't do this, I'm saying do this, but is there any way to add some, like what Rick was saying, deeper, infiltration wells on the ends of each of at least the key intersections where we have real danger, where people are driving down the middle of the street to get around that turnoff at El Camino? Could we do some really deep infiltration wells like sooner, 2 years, on our own dime with our own, yes, we can do it, while this gets put in place, and have it work as a two-phase thing?
We can, and I think that we originally had short-term and long-term solutions in our program planning. And due to workload issues, we kind of just jumped over that first one and went towards that long-term. We can certainly look at putting in a couple of infiltration trenches at some of the intersections as I'll call it a quick short-term fix. But there, again, it's really going to be dealing with those lower level storms. It's not going to help with as much with a larger level.
Any relief on those main
Yeah.
intersections that cause a problem, like just every,
Yeah, so
Always.
like I said, this year you might have noticed we did a bunch of clean out work and stuff along El Camino, particularly in the area near Selby.
Stockbridge too.
And Stockbridge, I believe it made a difference, but we really haven't had those big events this year yet.
Actually, but I thank you for doing it.
Yeah.
Certainly on Stockbridge, it's still out to you turn off El Camino down the middle of the street. It's
Yeah.
just a matter of time that someone's going to be this way, it's going to be head on.
Yeah.
So that's still there, but
Yeah, the other thing that we need to be careful about is I guess the coordination with the fronting property owners and what,
yeah,
so,
it's true too.
So that's to Robert's point. It- doing something right on the corners, right, is probably not going to be as effective because again, build these things up.
Sure.
But we wanted to do something along those lines, patient trend. Then what you do is you move the problem away from the corner onto someone's frontage, onto the street side, okay? And then how far do you want to go? Okay, so you make it so that an issue, everything's flooding, fine, but then as it dewaters, it's dewatering towards your infiltration trenches that are away from the corner. That way you're going to flood because you have to do something with the water. You can't just, it doesn't go away. So you pull it out of the example that you used, cars coming into each other, pull it away from the hazardous intersection, pull it away, and now it can sit there and spread and do whatever it's going to do further back. But again, you're dealing with folks' frontages.
All right, let me ask you another night. Sorry to keep asking,
So
but if you're coming,
before we jump on, I appreciate that you have more questions. I do want to hit that we need to be careful if we are pulling it away from the corner, we're actually creating a new flooding area.
right, well, what I was gonna say is I don't mean, and I see what you're saying, you're gonna push into that person's yard. But the way the water comes, and again, I'm not a scientist, but it comes down in a very big rush. It's literally a rushing stream during the storm coming from let's take Stockbridge, because I live there, so I see it.
Okay.
You got running like literally little waves. It's like a little river going down. What if you were to do your infrastructure not so that it pushed wider at the end, but all the way down? So all the way down, you're collecting some amount into some sort of underground thing, going way up, like blocks up Stockbridge before the end. So I'm not saying you could stop it, but you might be able to get, is it possible to get some amount that you're lowering the amount going down that whole river before it hits El Camino?
So I would say that, so I'd say, yes, you can do that. And oftentimes on the surface, it's done with things like check dams and what. So you build like mini reservoirs as you go down. The issue then comes back to cost. So what are you doing? How much is that going to cost? And would it be better to put the money towards a system that has a more positive dewatering effect?
I'd like to see them do it. And because time in this is that this thing, which is 100% we should do, the political stuff involved and the time frame on this is huge. Something that's on our own streets can happen sooner. So I'm saying an and, not an or.
Yeah.
So did we look at all at this and of anything we can do on our own street? Because I thought that was going to be part of this.
So Eric's focus has been on El Camino. I will say that as we talked about Selby, what we looked at were infiltration trenches along Selby. How many people are we impacting by doing that? And how much kickback are we going to get from the residents on Stockbridge or Selby by ripping up the sides of the street to do that?
I hear you saying that. And if you're ripping up the side of the street to put a bike lane and I don't ride bikes, then that's a big imposition. If you're ripping up my street to stop the main street from flooding and it's a safety
So
issue, different question.
I'm going to say that the public outreach process
That's
for
me.
that project would likely be as long as the implementation of this project.
And the reason why I would back that up is because Caltrans cares about safety of the roads. Pretty much all they care about. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. Caltrans cares about a lot of things, but primarily it's safety on the road. We're putting a pipe in underground, underneath all these utilities. No one cares about that. So if we put that in, Caltrans is going to look at this and go, big deal. Even though we're in there right away. So we still have to ask, pretty please, may we? Yes, you like it.
Safety.
We'll show them the old maps that say, you're supposed to build this, guys, and you didn't. So some egg on your face, do our stuff. But from a regulatory point of view, this Caltrans isn't going to turn around and sue you for however long. They're going to look at this and they're going to say, okay, this is, you're out of our way. You're not encroaching on anything we're planning to do in the future. So we'll give you the right.
I would say upstream, that would be very disruptive. All that trenching in, but like maybe % of puddles, if that, and people are still gonna see puddles. They're like, you ripped up our roads and we still have flooding. I think that off, even knowing that there's a bigger, I think that's a very complicated.
The other,
If you live on that street, you complicate it.
Like my
'Cause I
corner
hear
floods
this.
every time it sprinkles. So like
Yeah.
I'm like
Yeah.
2 weeks after a storm, I'm like driving through a puddle to get through the house. So like I get it, but if you told me doing construction in front of your fence, a couple months, it's not a short thing, I assume. And then I still have puddling, I'm gonna be like, what was that for? This would be, I think, a versus if we're like, there's a plan to do it correctly.
so the other issue, and I know we're way off track, and then I apologize for holding up the author. But the other part of what we're suggesting here, we say going way up the street, right? Fantastic. You still have this grade differential, right? So it's like a garden hose. You got to be high enough here to make sure that the whole thing is full of water. If you've got a low point here, water is going to run and it's going to puddle here. Even though you've got this great long filtration trench, you're going to have to put check dams in, stuff like that. It's not as simple as it sounds. It would help, but to Vice Mayor Huang's point, well, you're going to do all this and you see a 25% improvement. Some people won't even see that much.
The question that hasn't been answered, because you don't have a question yet, I don't think there's just a infiltration trench versus the major pump system that goes 25 feet down. The question that I have is how far down is the water table?
25 feet.
And 25 feet?
Yep.
So
We're
that's
above-
important information.
We're above when we're drilling, if we put this line in, we are above the phreatic line.
You're going 25 feet down. How are you 10 feet above the water line?
We're not 10 feet above the water line. We're above the water table, right? Up until we get really close to the pump station. Then we're really close to the water table. We're in it basically. It doesn't matter because it's just like a concrete manhole sitting there. Most of it's dry. It's waterproof. Pumps just sit there waiting for the water to.
So the water table is 25 feet down throughout this El Camino area, approximately.
About 20 or 25?
25.
Okay. So what we're trying, I'm sorry, Councilmember. That 10-foot separation is from the bottom of your infiltration trench to the water table.
That's different. So you're allowed to have pipes with
You're
it,
allowed to have pipes
but
below
you can't
that.
have an
You can't
infiltration.
have infiltration wells that go below that line.
Orange, should we keep your
Sure.
slides?
Okay.
Sorry.
Excellent. No, that's okay. Now, these are all very helpful questions. I appreciate it. Next slide. So I've been kind of waving my hands, but this is a graphic that shows, okay, so you come in over at Stockbridge over on the left-hand side, you've got a pipe that drains. This is not to scale. And it goes to that hatched manhole, which is pump station. So you've got all these points that come in. And from there, it gets raised and pumped into a manhole. That manhole is going to have the float that says yay or nay to pump out into the Atherton channel. And we pump, released by gravity, into the channel, into one of the sides of the culverts. So that's the basic plan. You can see, even though there's these little hatched infinity lines that say, hey, this is way longer than it looks like. See on the top, see the dashed line with arrows on top of it. And you see that it's not a nice straight slope. It's got a bit of up and down. There's some sawtooth there. So the idea of trying to grade everything smooth way in one direction, very challenging. So what you need is you need to catch it at these low spots or these points of concern. So when we're looking at this, we're thinking, okay, one's going to go on each side of the intersection to the roads that come to the, and that way you can ensure that you have positive drainage at the end of a storm system to dewater. So if there's a puddle, it's not going to be at the intersection. That's what this is designed to do. Another thing that we looked at, again, as I mentioned earlier, was how this would impact the different alternatives for the improvements along the El Camino. The last thing you want is to put this infrastructure and then not be able to get to it. So we made sure that the alignment was in a place where you dig things up if you have to. There will be access to this line through the catch basins, basically, and the manholes that are associated with it. So from a maintenance point of view, this thing is pretty easy to maintain, like any storm drain system, but it's a dewatering system. So we wanted to show this to say that, yeah, no, and this is something that would convince Caltrans too. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, you guys are deep and you're not conflict with any of the improvements that we're going to put on the surface. So these numbers may be hard to read, but we wanted to get an idea of order of magnitude of what we're talking about. So we're looking at soft costs and hard costs. The construction costs are towards the bottom. We asked a couple of directional drill folks what it would cost and how they would set it up. And they looked at the plan set in pretty good detail. And they go, yeah, no, we would do a launch pit where the manholes go, drill in one direction until we got to the next manhole, and then we turn it around and we drill the other direction until we got to the other manhole. So we're being very efficient. We only have to set up 3 or 4 times. And that's how they got a cost of 2.7 million.
Horizontal drilling is so that instead of full trench,
We're not doing it.
it'll just happen under the road while people are driving on it.
It will happen. We'll close off that lane. So just for safety, you've got a piece of equipment in that area. So you're going to be separating, you'll have a separator for traffic and a piece of equipment that drops down to whatever level it needs to. And the horizontal drill is doing its thing all underground. So aside from the area that you cordon off, be able to do the drilling, everything else stays the same. So we threw in some contingencies, some permitting, environmental. The environmental, if we do this where we're talking about doing it, there should be a minimum amount of environmental regulations that we have to go, because we're not touching the channel, just poking a hole into it, which is still a big deal, but We're not affecting the banks. We're not affecting the dusky-footed wood rat. We're not frogs. Just putting a hole through a culvert, through the wall of a culvert. And we're not going to dump water in unless the water level is low. So from a regulatory point of view, this is a very non-invasive type. Care about the channel? Else. And like I said, we looked at not just horizontal drill in that one section, but this also includes, there's $250,000 there for grading along the roadway. There's a lot of leaf litter and debris and stuff like that that's just accumulating on the sides. So you've got a property line, you've got the El Camino sloping this way and a bunch of leaf litter. That's impacting the overland well. So we want to add as much as possible. Yeah, go ahead.
Question. It's a little different. Way I would imagine this project will go, have to get project ready so that we have all the details that we can bring to our partners, and we may have to fund that part of it. To get a shovel-ready proposal where we outline all this, but it's enough detail that we can partner and call it shovel-ready funding. How much would that cost us? Where would it be? It's like, what, is that all part of the?
So up at the very top
Yeah.
would be final design and bid support. We've
So
got-
it would, so at that point, at the 275,000, we'd be
Yeah.
at a shovel-ready document that we can share with.
I'll add to that.
Yeah.
If you want to be shovel ready, that means that we have all the permits in hand, that
Oh,
we've cleared all the environmental stuff. And so what we're talking about is everything before construction are basically items 1 through 5. Item 6 there is construction management and inspection charges. But I'm not,
So 1 to 5, and if you total those up, that would be what we need to have if we,
About.
to want to get a shovel-ready project that we bring
But
to our.
shovel ready is
partner
irrelevant.
cities?
What's relevant is what do you need to be able to go out and get grants?
Yes, that's what I mean.
so you,
100%, you have to have all the permits.
It increases your chances of getting a grant, yes.
So I'm sorry, what was that
we'd
number?
have to think who'd actually we also have to think about who'd actually partner with us to fund this, because there aren't
course.
really that many grant opportunities for just this piece.
But he was implying that Caltrans is, it's really on onus on them to help our streets be safe. So it sounds like we might, no? Was I hopefully wishing that you're implying that?
Yeah, no, I'm not implying that Caltrans cares about your side streets at all.
Okay.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, they care about the flooding on El Camino.
They care about the flooding on El Camino, and the rule of thumb that Caltrans uses is, does it impact the travel way? That's all they care about, the travel way. They don't care about your shoulder. And in a 3-lane situation, they only have to keep 2 lanes operational. They could flood the first lane
Flood
all the way
middle lane.
from Menlo Park to Redwood City, and they don't.
So they don't have any responsibility, this level of, like, this isn't a project that's normally in there. Would just be pitching it as a pre-project to the big El Camino.
Yeah,
complete.
so I say the drawback that you have, or the balancing act, is if it were part of the other project, it could be potentially funded by the other project, but that's a long-term
Yeah.
project, and our goal is to get this done sooner.
Yes, right.
And so the opportunities to find a funding partner, it's going to be difficult.
It doesn't mean we can't reach out to CCAG or the MTA and others and see if there are grants that might be helpful once we move toward that shovel-ready point. But at the end of the day, if we want to do this project and there's no grant available, it is our dime.
So the shovel-ready part almost sounds like we're gonna have to make that lift. And then once we have that amount, now we can go to CCAG, now we can go to Caltrans.
But we've gotten funding from CCAG before
Right, but if they
before
don't,
we got permits.
if they don't fund it, if they don't have a grant opportunity for us, then Caltrans isn't gonna give us a wad of cash to go do it. It's gonna be our dime.
And we're happy to try and find funding partners and reach out. So before we move on, so this is predominantly that southern end. Are there any more big questions on this piece? Doesn't look like it.
I mean, the only thing I would say, I was pursuing the issue of dry wells, because to the extent that we can recharge the aquifer rather than flushing the water into the bay, it would be better.
Yeah.
If in fact it only means extending a dry well from 3 feet to 10 feet, it isn't material.
Right.
But if we could put those dry wells in further than 10 feet, that, I mean, a lot further, it could be material.
Right. You end up having to look very carefully at the regulatory impacts. So you can't just put a hole in the ground as deep as you want.
No, I understand that.
There's
But-
impacts.
But that requires just information and knowledge that I don't have.
Well,
We don't have.
we're talking about the water table being at 25 feet at the El Camino. So you could go 15 feet down without tripping over any type of regulation.
And is there any value in doing that? I mean, what if we had, I don't know how many dry wells we have in this area now.
We don't really have any in this
But
location.
we've got dry wells in Almondral and I mean, there's several places there's dry wells in there. I
So
think there
we have
aren't they on the
several
map.
throughout the town. I just don't recall any specifically along El Camino.
Uh,
But that being said, I think that as we talked about, we can look at supplemental putting in dry wells even potentially in advance.
I assume drilling a 15-foot well isn't that expensive.
It's not, but you're talking about gaining seconds of time or flow.
If you can't get through the clay.
No, I'm saying what you will see in terms of ponding on the surface will still be very significant. The impact of a dry well, unless we make it, we can come back with orders of magnitude of what it takes. It's like, yeah, you can have a dry well. It's going to be 8 feet wide, 15 feet deep, and 1,000 feet long. That will buy you this amount of time or whatever.
It's another stupid question. When we were going to do the Carden Field water filtration system, this is way before my thought about it, but it sounded like it was the kind of system that would collect the water filter. I don't know if it put it into the canal or if it put it in.
It would go right back into the.
Are there smaller versions of that we put on our own property just to collect? Again, you're talking about, if he was talking about making drilling straight down and that's only getting seconds, is there any sort of other kind of infrastructure we could put on our own property along that creek? But that, like the Cardigan, like a small version of what we were going to do before, that filtered and then to the water table?
So I think that project didn't touch the water table. What it did is it provided some detention and storage capacity for water that is already in the channel to lessen the impacts downstream, as well as to filter and clean the water before it got returned into the channel. And so it would pull out sediment and debris and trash, remove all of those things that float down from continuing its way downstream in the channel, and basically have a detention capacity, storage capacity to kind of hit and save that peak flow from going as high as it does. And so there are similarities with this project insofar as we are going to have to separate trash and pull debris so it doesn't clog the pumps and that kind of stuff. So that we're going to be filtering and clearing out, collecting it before it discharges back into the channel. That's part of our maintenance costs that he has also. Um, And we have limited storage. So the reality is right now, the street is your storage, right? It's ponding in the street. What's going to happen is that most of that now is going to go underground into the pipe and then as Eric used the term, dewatered. We're going to slowly empty that water and discharge it clean into the channel.
Are there, it's called purple pipe, they're recycled water that
Yeah,
becomes-
that's recycled wastewater.
Couldn't you
Totally
do
different
something
issue.
like that with stormwater? Could you create a pipe system of stormwater?
Well, there's a different system that people can do at their homes. It's usually called a gray water
Gray water,
system.
that's what I'm talking about.
And that's reusing,
Yes.
water,
Is there any
but-
way we could create a citywide gray water system that we're now collecting water? It's one
that's,
of our, that might be a green thing, we need infrastructure money for.
I'm going to say that's well beyond
tank.
the capacity of the town. We don't have a water distribution system. I don't think we want to be in the business of that. And the other part is that we also don't want to store this water forever for reuse. We're just temporarily, we're finding a way to get rid of that water as efficiently as we can.
When we're collecting the water from downstream into that, the school site that we toured, they had flooding on the tour that was part of our channel. The channel comes down, it goes across and there's a school. The school put in drainage systems. They had a plan to do, what it was like in the back field. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so that is similar to what was going to happen at Carton Field. That was one of the first renditions, was to do that at the school.
That's not a different approach. It's just the same thing.
Yeah, and it's well upstream from where we're talking about here.
I have a question, kind of tying to what Rick was saying, because I think his point is a good point, that when we're dealing with water, because we're dealing with storm years, flood, drought years, storm years, drought years, so trying to keep some of that water and recharge our aquifers is a good goal. I also know we have the whole, like, it's not one shoreline, but it's the one
Shoreline.
shoreline has there's the other one, there's the one, whatever, that's like stormwater. Don't they have programs for recharging the aquifer? I'm just wondering if we had some component of this plan that had some recharging features to it, if that would unlock funding
trying
opportunities
to
for
ask.
us.
We can certainly look into that.
Well, one shoreline member is actually coming back to the town to ask for our funding support.
Our money. But there's two, right? There's one shoreline and then one,
I don't
there's
know
two
the other
one
one.
whatevers.
The Bay Area Water Quality Control Board,
Right.
which issues municipal stormwater permits, but I don't know another stormwater agency beyond one shoreline.
Yeah.
wondering if that unlocks secret money access.
The part of the issue with that is that once you're recharging groundwater, you're dealing with operator permits and reporting and stuff. That's a big deal. A big deal. So you get a place like San Jose, it has their recharge ponds in Los Gatos and stuff like that. But that doesn't scale.
We're not going to be at that scale.
Probably El Camino
But
is
I
not a
think
good
that,
spot for it.
I think that there are ways to incorporate some infiltration within the project. I think there was one other question that might have been asked by Councilmember Lewis. We alluded to it, is that, again, the primary construction method would be directional drilling. So minimizing the surface work. So we're not looking, because if we were trying to dig a trench 25 feet deep, that gets to be really expensive regardless of how big or small that pipe is. Shoring and other safety measures that need to happen along that stretch of roadway. So directional drilling is the proposed method of construction. In addition to the drill rigs and other things, they'll be having the pipe basically laying behind them, probably 1,000 feet of welded pipe that they will be feeding through the machine. So there are going to be, thankfully, there's a limited number of driveways along El Camino, so the disruption to residents getting in and out will be limited. But there are obviously going to be construction impacts during the work. One other question I think was related to timing. And so Eric has a little bit more investigatory work to do at the north end. We'll share that information through George with you all, probably through one-on-ones and other things rather than a big study session. And then following that, Eric's going to finalize his report and recommendations. We phased Fryer and Loretta's contract in two pieces. First is this conceptual level work. And then the second part, if we choose to move forward, is getting into the final design documents. And so for that approval, we'll have to come back to the council if we want to move forward with that second phase and get towards those getting towards that shovel-ready project.
So one other thing, that as you do the investigation at Selby on whatever it is that's there, what we've been informed on the council is that there was a storm drain that went to Redwood City and drained on the southern end of Redwood City down to the Bay Canal. And that was stopped up by Redwood City because there was flooding in that area that took our water as well as Redwood City's water. And so they stopped it up. And obviously there's a potential solution of doing a deal with them where it gets opened up if in fact it's there. And that, I don't know if that information's accurate. I'm sure that drain is old, but if it is accurate, there is an alternative to this for some of the northern section of the El Camino here, which would be what kind of a deal we do with Redwood City to make it so that that water can be carried out to the bay down their existing channel.
Yeah, that's,
So-
once we know what that, what that culvert goes to or
Yeah.
went to, then there's a conversation with Redwood City about whether they would be willing or not to take any water. Because then they have to look at, well, how much can they
Yeah, no, I
can they
understand.
handle and stuff like that. So there's
That's not a detailed level of conversation we've ever been able to have. We've talked about it for 10 years.
okay. Yeah, no, I'm happy to have that sidebar conversation with the Public Works in city.
Politically, if we were to pursue that, so let's say you go in, camera and stuff is viable with some repair, do we have to pay the other city to take our water? Is that how that financially works? Say Redwood City, we have this water.
So I'm going to say that's going to be a political conversation between the two jurisdictions.
But how's it usually? You have cities that are sharing
They-
water systems.
So there's a difference between accepting water that already comes to you and accepting more water. And so Eric and I have talked about kind of another potential solution for that north end, but I don't want to get into that until we get more information
Okay.
in such a way that there may be a way to discharge some of that water in a manner that doesn't require that political conversation, but it would be a limited amount. So
Okay, so you guys need,
we need it,
Feedback?
like I said, like I said, Eric's going to continue his investigation and we'll share that information with the council through George and we'll be able to get feedback that way.
so do you feel like you have enough feedback on this or do we need?
I think we're good. I haven't heard too much about no, stop, don't like what you're doing. So we'll continue with this type of solution with some augmentation to look at the inclusion of some additional infiltration trenches and other point solutions that can help along the way as we look forward to completing our investigation and coming up with recommendations for the north side. So thank you.
Love it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric.
I'm
Thank you very much,
glad.
folks.
Yeah,
Very
Appreciate it.
glad you guys are doing it. Thank you, Robert. Thank you.
it's the type of
Okay.
thing that you should be looking.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Okay, are we ready for our second item?
Second, Eric?
The second, Eric.
I think I should have done
So-
it first because my name starts with the name. It's Eric with an
So similar, we're sticking along on the topic of drainage. This here is looking at projects that were identified in our original drainage study update that was done in 2015. And one of the priority projects was the condition of the Atherton Channel. And so a priority project predominantly because of its impacts not only to the flooding, but to private property and potential damage. And so what this project is an investigation of the Atherton Channel from Alameda de las Pulgas going west, uphill, upstream, towards Valley Road. And we contracted with Tetra Tech to do the investigation analysis, come up with recommendations for solutions for repair of the channel. And you have in your package, and Eric will be highlighting some of the issues that were found. And so the master plan identified about 1,000 feet of channel bottom and about 1,000 feet of banks that along the channel that at the time, 10 years ago, were in disrepair and needed to be addressed. And so one of the questions was, is that the full length? And so the answer is, it's not the full length. It was an estimate of how much of the channel needed to be repaired. So Eric and his team have done a LiDAR survey, have walked the channel, have taken a whole bunch of pictures and come up with some preliminary recommendations with regards to how we can fix the channel such that it is able to withstand storms, addressing all of the erosion and failure issues that are there, and protect the properties that are alongside. Because as you are likely aware, that we have an easement through each and every property for the purposes of drainage and maintaining the channel. And so we don't own the underlying property. We just have the right to convey through those properties the stormwater. And so these are preliminary ideas, wanting to get your feedback. There are a number of steps that we go through from here, one of which that will likely have its largest impact on what solutions we can actually implement are the conversations with the regulatory agencies. So unlike the other project, which really the real regulatory agency was Caltrans, this one we're talking about the Regional Water Quality Control Board, the Fish and Wildlife, potentially Army Corps of Engineers. And so we know that through the channel area, there are some habitat areas. And so that's also one of the next items that is going to be happening is kind of once we figure out kind of what we want to do, that initial consultation with the regulatory agencies. And then we're going to have to start diving into the environmental stuff. So with that, I'm going to introduce Eric. I don't know if you heard earlier, but I guess Eric is the name for drainage. We have Eric Billand from Friar and Loretta, but even this isn't the only Eric on Eric's team. He's got two more Erics on his team as well. So thank you, Eric. Why don't you go ahead?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Everyone. So yeah, so we're here to kind of present the project itself because you can see the agenda. We can go over the work that's completed, the items that we have, discussion points from those items. The really big thing that we did do is the channel inspections and the overview. So we went out there, kind of did a preliminary of it, took some notes. We got some LiDAR, then did some preliminary modeling. Then we also went back out again, kind of identified and kind of mapped everything up, kind of linked it up a bit. Came up with some conceptual design solutions, discussed some considerations, and forward now. So that's what we have to present today. So we have some slides here, so you can see the typical channels. Some areas actually have what we call sackcrete, which is basically a burlap sap concrete. It's a little great structure that works until it doesn't. So there's a lot of that out there. It looks like there was some shotcrete repair. Right there you can see is Walsh Road on the left side of the pictures there. So there's actually an embankment there that kind of failed. I think the property owner mentioned that he replaced that fence a bit. There is some sandstone there that's kind of protecting it from further erosion. So this is a very unique wash in which there's existing old improvements that have been incorporated. There's been other improvements such as concreting of the invert. And then there's a lot of vegetations, trees, wildlife that kind of helps resist some of the scour and kind of keep the creek as a natural kind of creek. Then you also have some geologic formations, some which are more susceptible to scour, others which kind of resist it. So these are just some pictures through this, starting from the bottom, moving up. So if we go to the next slide, you can see some other items.
You say starting at the bottom, is that at the channel in Alameda de los Povas?
Yes, just the upstream side of that, just so to the north.
Scour.
A scour is, well, you'll see it. So on the left picture here, you have a failure. So this is where you probably had a tree. Sackcrete is not reinforced. So it's kind of like stacking, you know, when you were a kid and you made mud rocks and you stacked them. They dry, they kind of stick together. Well, and then you push them over and they break apart, right? So that's kind of like sackcrete. So it's good. And when the flows are low and there's not a lot of loading on it, you know, you get a tree roots start to grow, start to crack it. You get some failure. That's what you have on the left. I think the next slide, if we go to that, so scour would be on this slide. So you can see on the left side, you can see on the right how the bank, those are actually roots that are exposed. So that's where the soil's been removed. It's gone downstream. Also, you can see on here is this is part of the concrete slab, but you can see that little green part where the water is on the right. So actually that's probably about a foot or two deep. So that's what scour is, where the bedding gets removed. It kind of goes below grade. So you have a loss of channel width, loss of channel, you know, a removal of channel slope and bank and stuff like that.
All these different materials, have we done that? Is that city, or do the private residents actually go out and decide to do stuff for themselves? Or have all these different, through the eras, one year we did sacks, one year we did cement? How did it work?
I don't,
I'm going to say this channel dates back before the 50s and it has been incrementally improved. Some by, I think, I'll let George answer, but some by property owners and some by the town.
So it's a mix of private and,
But anytime a property owner wants to make improvements in, around, or near the channel, they have to go through the town to get a permit. So we do inspect.
so you keep track of it, but it's a mix of what we've done and what private residents have done.
Yeah,
so as we go through the wash, you see some developments or some people have developed newer homes, maybe 10 years. So that part, they went through the permit process. They're building close to the wash. They may put some walls or something in there. A lot of this, as was said, is very old 50s, you know, previous, I think, before the town got, you know, so basically it's kind of like the town incorporated it and now you own it, right? So it was like previous county items that were just kind of done. A lot of it could have been just county maintenance staff going out there, getting a concrete truck and slapping some concrete on there and then going away, you know, 80s or the 70s. So yeah, these are just a couple of the typical channel conditions. On the right there, you can see a lot of poison oak. So that's the fun part. But as I mentioned, you know, you have a lot of trees, a lot of foliage that's kind of washed out the roots. So it's kind of unique in that we have these trees that are still surviving. So the improvements got to take that kind of into consideration on how we pair these items. So that kind of goes into our next solutions. Sorry. A couple last ones. So this is as we get upstream. There is a section of channel that's actually existing kind of mortar and rock or mortar and sack broken up concrete. So just urban ways of making drainage ditches. You just use the material that's there and kind of throw some concrete in there and works for what you need it, right? Because your house is offset from it. And then there's some improvements that are done by the large irrigation water line that goes underneath. So it seems like there were some check dams that were done, some improvements. So you can see those are actually more infrastructure that's out there with riprap up and downstream. I think that's kind of used to help prevent scour. There's a natural section that starts just upstream of the rock channel where it goes to a natural. So that portion is more susceptible to scour and what we would call head cut, which is where you have a section that's natural. So you have concrete here, so it's not going to scour. But then you have a natural section that's maybe a little steeper, so it'll want to scour and flatten out, and then you have a big drop. So I think those were kind of installed, that's my opinion, but I think those were kind of installed to help protect the water line, to prevent any type of head cut back that would eventually cause failure of transmission water line.
There's some images where you see piping. Are any people, do they have pumps and pipes that take water out of the channel?
I think somebody's being green the natural way by sucking up some of the creek water there. There's a lot of runoff that comes through there from people's homes and their irrigation. I think somewhere downstream, there's a good spot where they were able to kind of put a little sump pump, just pump water to water their grass and stuff like that. So rains is going to probably get blown out, but they have a system for it or something, but that's something technically should be permitted. It's not going to cause too much damage from a flood perspective. So hydraulic modeling, we're using the Army Corps HECRAS model. We did use the LiDAR. Flow rates are based upon the town drainage study. Just to give you an idea of the amount, they range from 250 on the very beginning as it starts coming down. And on the downstream side, they're up to 750 to 800. So a CFS, if you picture, it's about the size of a football. That's about a cubic foot. So imagine 700 footballs coming at you. 800 footballs every second. So that's a lot of flow. His pump was one of those per second. So you can play catch a lot easier than you can with that. So we did go through, we've added some of the bridges and the channel improvements that have been out there. And then our next steps are also going to go out there to provide some supplemental topographic mapping to kind of help really nail that down, to really kind of fine tune our model. But we do have some preliminary results. So this next slide here.
Wait, before you leave that slide, is the blue area in the upper right, Alameda School?
Yeah, that we didn't get too detailed in that. So, but as you'll see if I go to the next slide, you'll see what happens. So what's happening here is that at the culverts are undersized. So if you go to the slide real quick, the profile. So on the left, so on this is that little blue line, that's the water surface. So you see every time there's like a little bridge or a roadway, the water is going to, those are really what's constricting the channel out here. I mean, there's some other things going on, of course, the vegetation and everything. But it seems some of the bridges and crossways are really kind of slowing it down. They're undersized, so it ponds. So when the resident said, hey, it was raining and I saw the water approach the top of the bank, that's more of is like, well, there's a street 100 feet down and it's either clogged or it can't take the amount of flow. So it's ponding up and it's just, and then it goes down. So the downstream side of that, though, is probably shooting out pretty good. But as you can see, so our model goes from the upstream up. So we didn't really do too detailed downstream of that, but the culverts and that culvert that goes underneath the school is undersized. Now there'd be more detailed mapping to really see what happened, like a 2D model. This is a 1D, so it's just kind of cross sections and simplified. To really do any type of floodplain mapping, once it breaks out, you'd want to do a 2D because it's not representing the streets and things that can convey flow and flooding. So it just plots it based upon the 1D, whereas it would kind of spread out. A lot of it would maybe take some of the street routes, and we'd have to look to see what the actual flooding is. That would be a secondary item or something further. But as of right now, the culverts are the part of the problem when it comes to the higher flows, the 25, the 50, 100-year flow events. So those are the once in 100-year EMA events or the 25, 10-year events, which of what you guys have been getting from what we've hear. So, they've said, from what I heard in working with the team, they kind of mentioned that you guys had a couple large storm events equal to like the 100-year events already. So that's basically it kind of lines up with what we see. Now we can probably fine tune some of the modeling and maybe it'll say, oh, it'll pass through the culvert. So then it'll kind of match more what the residents saw. Most of the hydrology, anyone can tell you, is plus or minus 10%. So 820 or 80. There's a big swath of variance in hydrology. But so that's why that 1%, that one CFS is negative. It's within the air of our models. So anyway, so
What are the red lines on?
those are some of the roadway crossings.
So those are in the screen before, you had a bunch of little green lines. What were the green?
If you go back to those are the cross sections. So that was where we took like, okay, we're gonna look at the channel section and run a cal.
Okay.
So you
that's
add a
just
whole bunch
showing
of
what-
those and then you tell it to run it and it balances everything as it goes through. So it's energy,
one are bridges.
friction
Okay.
and all that stuff. All the modeling stuff there. All right. So from that, we've also have depths and flow rates and velocities and shear. So we can kind of help determine like, what are we going to need to do to kind of protect the banks from that perspective? So go ahead, next slide. do you
Eric,
want?
before you go too far, for the most part, the water's contained within the channel. And so we do have areas where we have overtopping, like we know during the really heavy events, such as like at Alameda de los Pulgas. This project starts from Alameda going uphill. We have another project on the books to look at improving Alameda into the school with some detention. That's a separate project from this. And we're still waiting for confirmation from FEMA for funding on that. Okay, and so this project pretty much stops at that line. One of the things that Eric Model has shown is that the culvert under Alameda is a restriction during those heavy events. We already know that. And so that restriction causes some backup. But the good news, like I was saying before, is that for the most part, the channel holds the water that is coming down that direction. The issue that we have is that the sides in some spots are gone. The bottom in some spots are gone. And so this project is intended to fix that and to keep things in place. So with that here, I think Eric's ready to start talking about some
And a
potential
point to
solutions.
make is sometimes those can help to reduce the scour because it slows the water. So in a way, it's like, okay, well, let's go fix the culverts. Well, okay, now you're making the water go faster now through the system. So then now you need to go add some additional downstream or upstream because now it's not a ponded area that's moving slower. It's going to roar through there because there's not that restriction, right? It's like, after the top pulls away, freeway, and then everyone starts going. That's what's happening. Right now you have a cop there kind of saying, stopping everyone. He's going to go and everyone's going to start flying down the freeway.
So when it goes faster, we'll have less scour or
More scour.
more scour?
So then
Okay.
it's
We're
more of an
sandblasting
issue
the
of,
sides.
yeah. So it's balancing act of nature, I guess you can say. So the conceptual design, we went out there, we developed some solutions and some things. For the most part, we do want to kind of proposing in-kind repairs or similar, what we call in-kind, for instance, Saccrete's no longer something that we put down. We would put some type of reinforced concrete. So that's for the concrete areas where there might be a damage or a failure. We'd want to go back and put concrete there. One item to note too, though, is there's existing shotcrete and Saccrete. Kind of hard to tell how good it is. It's kind of like one of those things like it's good until it's not. Kind of difficult to see. I mean, we can see large cracks and we know, okay, that part needs to be repaired. And then we have these areas. So most of the time where you have a picture like this, we'll go in there and repair it with what we would call in-kind, which would be a reinforced section. And we would repair any large cracked portions, but the existing stuff we kind of want to just leave as right now. So it's a large cost to go through.
Is this image tree roots or concrete or a combination?
So it's a combination. What you had there is some Saccrete that was holding up. So it was like a vertical section where there was a big tree. And so you have the tree roots and the weight of the tree. So I assume probably during some wind event, it was all saturated and soils leaned over and then it just starts pushing the Saccrete around. Eventually the Saccrete breaks. There's a flood event that comes down, things like that weaken it. So then it just fails.
Where there is plant material, trees or remnants of trees like the roots in the channel, is the resident from whose property that comes from responsible to remove it?
So if there is let's say a tree that falls or something like that, then the property owner is responsible to remove the tree.
Well, in many cases we've had trees fall and
Yes.
may have taken the
And
tree
some-
out, or they may not have done anything. And we may be left with the roots in there.
Yes.
Aren't they responsible for removing that?
So most of the time when the trees are removed, it'll be removed up to a point, depending on the tree and its condition. If it's a dead tree, a lot of times they'll just lop it off near the bottom. If it is a fell tree, then they'll take and remove the entire tree. I'm going to say there's pluses and minuses to root systems. The good news is a lot of times it holds the dirt together, which is really important. But as erosion happens, it causes problems. And so there's a fine line. We don't want necessarily people to take out the entire root structure, predominantly because we're concerned about if they did it, what would it do to the channel? On the other side, we have trees that are growing in and alongside the channel that as they grow are causing damage. And so that's one of the things that will be repaired as part of this. And later on, we'll probably have a conversation as the design is further developed. How comfortable are we taking out some of these trees? But we haven't gotten to that detail level yet.
And if a tree does fall across the channel and it's an emergent situation, we will remove the channel section of the tree and put the
Pieces on the side.
pieces on the side, and the property owners get charged for that.
They get charged, yeah. So if in the course of this, there's that kind of situation, we'll remove it and charge the property.
That or
I'm
let's
sure
say,
that exists.
I'm going to say that prior to Eric getting started, there were a couple of trees that we found that had fallen in the preceding storm events, and we reached out to the property owners and they removed them.
And as he mentioned, part of some of the natural measures that you can look at are what we call root balls, where they actually get old tree roots and they kind of stub the tree into the side and the root balls out. It acts as like a barrier, slows down the water, and it's so heavy that it's something, they bury it so it's kind of stuck. So it kind of, that's a natural measure. So that's why he was saying sometimes it's good to keep those root balls. And through the pictures, you'll see some areas where some of the soil's been removed. See roots exposed, but the tree's still living fine, living its best life. So we also looked at other alternative measures, using riprap to repair some of the areas. Riprap's more flexible. And then also, we're also looking at gabion rock wall baskets, which are good for more vertical sections. Riprap, you have to lay back on a slope. Gabions, you put a retaining on them. There's also in the area, there's also been use of stabilizing sections like a log crib wall. That usually has an issue possibly with life cycle.
Yeah.
There's actually one that's actually in there, which I can have a picture later on. A lot of these repairs will be dependent upon the environmental permitting, negotiations and discussions with them.
So Eric, let me just clear up probably some terminology items. Yes. So when we talk about riprap, what we're talking about basically are large rocks. And so they're usually going to be about 1.5, 2 ton.
No, this will probably be more like angular, but yeah, 18 inches or so.
Okay.
Too heavy
So-
to carry, but
Yeah. So
not too hard.
basically what it is that you're stacking a bunch of heavy rocks along the side to kind of keep that channel embankment. And sometimes they're cemented in so that when you have the heavy storm, they're not carried away. So the larger the rock, the heavier the rock, the more likely it is to withstand the action. Gabions are basically, think of it like a chain link fence type cage, probably about 2 to 3 feet deep, maybe about 4 or 5 feet wide and about 3 or 4 feet tall, filled with rock. And so basically it's a rock cage that basically kind of gets stacked almost like Legos. And so he's got that picture on the right-hand side there, where these rock cages, again, they're big, they're heavy, they're held together so that they, again, protect the side. They're allowed to be a little more vertical than, if you're stacking just rock by itself. And then the third one that he talked about was a log crib wall. I don't know, think back to your old days of Lincoln logs. And so basically it's kind of like the logs interlocked and then filled in with material to hold it in place. And so basically it'll be a wood log front and having the dirt behind it kind of holding it together. As Eric said, when you talk about durability and stuff, wood lasts less long than the rock or the concrete solutions. But he's looking at all of this because the regulatory folks are really going to dictate in this area where, let's say you've lost 6 feet deep of side, you can theoretically fit the log solution and have that slope that you're supposed to have in a more natural way than something that's hardened. But if all we have is 3 feet of property that we're allowed to put this in, we're going to be pushing for that thinner, more stable concrete type solution, predominantly because that's how much right of way or easement we have for that construction.
So let me, and so these ones are more natural materials, but they're not necessarily more green. So if you're talking about a green approach, where we said in our last meeting, we want you to put on a green hat and have a goal of absorbing or reusing more of the water as opposed to building a LA thing that just is cement down. But if you're looking at something that's going to absorb more and create more habitats for animals and all that, this difference here isn't that versus the cement. This is just talking about the materials, right?
Yeah, so this is, again, the materials and how it's constructed.
Okay.
And so if you're going to say, well, what might absorb more than others? The rock gabions are loose rock. I mean, they're substantial size, maybe about that big. So there's gaps, so water can seep in behind and allow for the little critters to crawl through the gabions and stuff like that. Concrete is hard, but it's the most durable item.
So it's a trade-off.
So we're going to have that give and take based on where we have the problems in that consultation with the regulatory agencies. They're going to be pushing us to, well, why can't you just put in dirt and grow grass? And we're going to say, well, because in 2 years, it'll be gone. So the answer might be, well, let's put the riprap and put stuff on top and let that grow. But if the big storm comes and it washes away, it washes away, but at least we still have our channel embankment. So that's going to be an iterative conversation with the regulatory agencies. We're going to start from what we think is best for the channel in that particular location, and then have those conversations about, we're going to be pushed to soften it. We know that. But at the end of the day, even if it's softer, we want it to be stable. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I totally get what you're saying, that we're in certain places you wouldn't be able to do it because of the circumstances.
But if we can and we believe it's going to hold, we're going to go that route.
But is there best practices, newer best practices of, if we have this goal that we're going to retain as much water as possible to the earth, we're going to maintain the natural habitats. So if you have that hat on, are there best practices or best materials that we out as a field, or are we just going by regulations?
There are best practices in terms of how to maintain and manage the channel. The issues that we have are really going to be space related. right? So the more space you have, the more that you can do with it. You can create ponding areas, you can create these things. But if we're constrained and our easement is only 25 feet wide, our easement is only 25 feet wide in that spot. That's not to say we might be able to do more in a different spot. But unless a property owner is willing to give us more rights, which most people are not, we're not really going to be able to widen the channel area. But I will say that there were a couple of pictures that you may have noticed that the channel was kind of terraced.
Was
So there was
terraced?
what?
Was terraced?
Terraced, yeah. So there was one picture that kind of showed a vertical section and then it kind of leaned back after that. Why don't you, if you go back a couple of pictures, keep going up, yeah, forward. It's the last set of these pictures. One more. There you go. So you see where on the, I guess it's the left side, you see the short wall?
Yep.
So there's a short wall, but the channel actually goes further wide, it's wider. And so you have a hardened piece in the middle and then softer stuff on the sides.
And would you remove that vegetation or no?
No,
It's not native, but it's part of the
I mean, the
Landscape.
reality is that
It
that
provides-
vegetation kind of holds the ground together.
systems. And usually your scour is going to occur at the bottom because that's where it's most, think of scour or friction, right? It's like it's got to rub to move. So the deeper and faster it moves, the more it's going to be to move. So that's where a hardened bottom, like this little U channel part, it takes a lot of flow down. And then as it gets a little bit shallow, as you come up and get to that terrace part, it's flowing slower. And it's not as deep. So then that way, that usually lasts a lot better. In this terrace portion, I don't think we're actually even proposing any improvements because it's like fine the way it is. There's no issues with the.
Yeah, no, I
damage.
just brought it up as a potential to kind of like say, well, we protect what we need to, but then there's other space, if we have the room, that we might be able to do something a little softer.
And right here on the right side, riprap is those rocks right there on the side.
Oh.
That's what riprap. And that's probably about the size we'd be to, similar to that size. But it can only be up on a slope. Flatter slope.
And Rick, was this the photo you were talking about, pipes going across the channel?
About what?
Pipes going across the channel?
No.
Yeah, no, I say, so there are.
There were others that looked exactly like a sump pump or some other.
Yeah, so there's also in other spots, there are utilities that, I mean, in various spots, there's
They
utilities.
they
that
may have
cross
been
the channel.
utilities. I couldn't tell what the
Oh, yeah.
pipes
So
were.
there's a lot of utilities, people's utilities that come across. Actually, I think if you look above my head there on the left side, looks like that rope. It looks like some type of telecom wire.
That looks like a bridge, is it not?
No, right below the bridge.
Oh,
Right
I
in front of
see.
the bridge,
That-
there's a wire there, I think.
Yeah,
Hang down, or it might be some.
That's
actually, those are
electrical?
Water pipes.
yeah, or a water
Yeah,
pipe.
so there, you have electrical, you have
Sure.
others, right?
Sure.
Yeah,
Things.
so,
I mean, some people's property bridges the channel, so
Yeah, that's a private bridge right there. That one right there that we're about.
What did we have to do to mitigate for the frogs in the past? Do we have little ponds and little
yes.
retention areas already? And is
I
that on
think
our
that was
land,
that picture that he showed on the other side.
on the other side?
So that same slide where the check dam was to hold
Okay.
water back and kind of slow it,
I have a,
Did you guys do?
right there. Yeah,
oh,
Oh,
okay.
the
so that
thing
was
on the
you guys-
right?
yeah, the picture on the right. So that structure there, those lower pieces of wood,
Yeah.
that holds water back, creates a little pond for the frogs and.
Side off of the channel, the water
I
goes over
think
there?
what you're
It's
talking,
right,
I
the water
think-
goes, that's in the middle of the channel.
And it
That's the
slows
channel.
it down.
But it creates a blockage. But
A
so you
little
can see
dam.
how there's that little U. So it creates a small ponded area. And then the water kind of waterfalls over when it's smaller. And if it's larger, it gets a little deeper. But it creates little ponds and little areas for.
What happens in a big storm in that? Does that just,
Right now, the water would come through and start to pond up. and then weir, what we call weir, but it'd start to go through that U part, and then if it got large enough, it'd start to kind of flank around the sides of it.
Will we most likely have to do something like this again?
We will find out.
Possibly.
Okay.
Yeah, so like I said, I mean, that's part of the environmental process.
Those are a little bit more of a structural solution. It's a little bit more expensive.
There's a ladder and piping that looks like a pump in site 7, slide 7 or site 7,
Site 7. Yeah, that's where the guy has a sump pump down there. So it's his ladder. I actually used it to get down to the channels. Thank you. Down there easier. But yeah, because as you can see, there's a lot of water. So this is in the concrete section. It's in the concrete section. So there's a lot of water going down the concrete. The channel itself has a lot of flow from dry flow. So he's down at the bottom in the concrete section. And he created like a little sump, pumps the water up. I think looks like he waters his grass and plants and stuff. Property.
Money was no object and you were going to go in and create a solution for this now? Because we have such legacy systems. It's fascinating. We got to walk it and see all the weird solutions that you're dealing with, trying to fix each one. If you had unlimited budget and you were going in to create this now, what we know about the goal of being able to chain the water and all that, which parts of it are best? Is it this terrace part that Robert was just talking about? Would you do the whole thing terrace?
In the best condition or the best concept? That's a tricky question, and I'll say this because I actually worked on the LA system restoration. So I've done both concrete line and ecosystem. So it's a question for the city on how much maintenance you want to do. And so easiest solution is concrete and get it out, but then that has downstream effects. Pushing more flow, so you have downstream issues. Or ecological way you go, a lot more maintenance.
So it's a
A
main.
lot less, so, and then environmental solutions only have so much, can only resist so much friction and flow. So you run into an issue of trying to balance those two to where you need to kind of, at least if you're going to have what we would call an engineered solution, provide the protection that you want, you would end up with some type of combination.
Yeah, I think the other part is, like I said before, how much space you have.
Yeah.
Space.
So the wider the area you have, the more you can spread out the water, which allows for more of the ecological benefits. And so that's unfortunately one of the things that we don't have is 100, 200 feet wide space to kind of have the water go slow.
So when you do speak to that, I know it's on your next steps slides, talking about confirming the existing channel easement. Can you talk a little bit about when you get there, if any portion of the current channel is outside of our current easement? You're aware of that?
Actually, if you go slide, that portion's probably outside. So the one picture on the left, you see all those roots there and see how that water looks like it's on the left. The actual existing channel that's concrete is actually on the right and it's covered with other sediment from the other slope sliding.
So that whole wet area.
That whole
is-
wet area is basically a scoured out portion of bank.
So
Yeah,
what,
so it's a balance, and it gets back to what you said, the ecological side. There's a balance of let it just be natural, but then you got to have larger offsets from the channel. And then you also have development, which increases scour. So you have to balance it. So the geomorphology side of things, geology of hydraulics and riverine systems and how waters affect stuff.
so, sorry, I'm just working through the next steps of George's question about the water has moved out of our easement. So the creek is not in the easement anymore. Does that mean we talked to change
We have
the
to
easement,
confirm
or
it.
do
Now,
we
have to
move the
confirm
water?
it. We have to confirm it, but based upon where the concrete is, and that's probably like an extra 10 feet over. So if
Yeah.
it's only a 25-foot easement, 10 feet of it was concrete. Well, you have 5 feet, 10 feet left of that. Well, I'm 10 feet over already and still 10 feet of bottom plus bank. So you're going to be inside your logic would say.
So
but-
I get that part. I'm more, what happens now? Do we then fill that side to move the water back? Or are we adjusting the easement? I don't, both seem
Well,
very
I
complicated.
think that that's going to be a conversation that we're going to have. The concern that I have is that people don't give up property rights
Yeah.
very easily. So the likelihood is that we would work out a solution with the property owner,
Okay.
with them understanding that we are going to be doing construction on their property. We might need a construction easement to restore, but ultimately, most property owners are going to want to push you to keep the real improvements within the easement. And so though they might give us temporary access and temporary permission to work on and from their property, they're going to likely say, well, your hardened channel or your real bank needs to be within that easement.
Mind you, on this section, I think Arden was,
Yeah,
so that's why.
but we're going to have to build back.
This
And
is where
and
those
this
big
there's
old
a solution
rocks.
there too, because then the building back is going to require a lot of fill.
Yeah.
Expensive to bring to truck in stuff and stuff. So I think if we go the bottom is kind of like the constrictions and things. When we do these improvements, so actually, yeah, if we go, no, I'm sorry, go to where we stepped out, where I last left off.
Keep going.
Yeah, right here. So now I'll go through. So if you go to the next slide, we kind of give an example for each one. So looky here, picture we just talked about. So in this section, if you were to kind of build back the slope a bit, you can add some riprap and then slope it back. Maybe we can balance that easement and widen it out and let it be natural. But this is something where we might do something like riprap embankment here because it's this big gap that we have to kind of. So that's one of how we would apply that section. Slide. So on this one, it's more of a vertical part. So you can see we have a thinner gap. So here we might use the gabions because it's more vertical, so we can protect it. And the next slide, I think, was one where actually this is from one of.
Yeah, there's the
but-
logs.
So there's the log concept, but then there again there's the log concept in action. So they deteriorate quickly. So, I mean, they work for a shorter time period. So it's just a balancing perspective. It's very moist here too. So then that's going to eat to the life longevity of. So then the next steps, if you're on the next slide, really are considerations that we talk about. And the red here is kind of like, just on this exhibit, the red is kind of like where we kind of initially said, hey, we need improvements for sure. There might extend more depending on how we go about and what we talk about. But we're really dealing with the work limits, the existing channel easement, identify, construction areas. A big item is the access, how you get down here, how do you move stuff from one to another? Right, if you have rocks, you have to deliver, truck that you drive on the street down in that creek, so you're going to have to dump it and move it. So that plays into the solutions and what's going to be more viable and what's going to be less viable. People are going to be assisting us with giving us temporary usage of their property items. And there's some areas that maybe more critical, something near a structure or something that we want to repair more critical. So we'll be discussing that. Some may be more open, can wait. So there's going to be a lot of items that kind of play into all that with the construction cost, the permitting, and then any special environmental constraints that may, kind of like this is a no-touch zone. This is a highly sensitive area. Some more. End up being a little bit more costly for that. Next slide is just our next do outs, which is going to be going back and then overlaying our easement. So we have a topo, so we can kind of see and we know where those areas are. So we can see where the easement is on that topo and say, yeah, this is where it's scoured out more. It's there. And then we'll be forming some supplemental topo to get more information to fine tune our stuff and then also go back and then tune our list of improvements. Coordinate with the resource agencies, which is going to be some of the most important items of what's going to be allowed or what can we go see that balance perspective. And then from there, just proceed with the 30% design cost estimates and continued coordination with you guys, keeping you apprised of the and the solutions and get some consent. Does have any other questions? Slide.
Go first. I have maybe a George question. For these people who have the creeks in their property, are there any guidelines for landscaping that they're allowed to do around the easement? Because there are, not a gardener, but I am trying to be, and I know some plants are marked as like these help erosion control type plants, and some are these help make your soil more permeable, which I assume would also make it more erosion likely. So I'm just wondering, are there any restrictions or guidelines for them to plant appropriate plants to maintain
There's
channel?
probably more restrictions than guidelines, but I mean, if they're gonna do any work within the channel, they do have to get a permit.
That
from the
includes
town.
landscaping?
So if it's just minor stuff, sometimes they're just gonna go in and do it without us even knowing, and we find it when we're doing inspections. But in terms of guidelines, I don't think we have any, but it's probably a good suggestion.
Yeah.
Especially once we complete this work, it seems like we should be
Yeah.
creating some kind of a program.
Good suggestion.
So the current contract we have, do you guys do the work as well?
No, they just do the design work.
So we're, out of all this, we're getting design.
Yeah.
And how long will it take to get design?
I'm not apprised of our current schedule.
I think so. I think they're ready to proceed on a quick pace. The holdbacks are really going to be what the resource agencies and the environmental requirements are. You know, do we need to do a frog delineation
Oh.
or those kinds of things where we have to bring others in to do extra mapping and that kind of stuff. But if we did not include that, I mean, they'd be done in probably about 4 months. But it's really, what's that?
As in projects like these, it's the permitting and
It's really the
consultations.
permitting timelines and those kinds of things. And to be honest with you, those take quite a while.
So in terms of actually starting to actually do, when are we what ballpark are we talking about when we'd actually do it?
We'd be lucky if we can do it in a year or so.
So, and when this construction's being done, does it have to be done in the dry period?
We will be restricted to work probably from April to October.
And would it take 1 year, or are we going to approach it in little sections? Because there's different materials. Are those
I
all done?
think that's going to be dictated pretty much by us and budget, right? They're going to develop the solutions, the estimates and all of that. We know that we're going to be restricted in terms of when we can work for 2 reasons, right? One is the environmental side, that you have to avoid nesting season and frog season and this, that, and the other thing. And the reality is that you can't work in the creek when it's raining,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
So
Yeah.
we've been relatively lucky this winter so far, but we don't know what the coming winters will be.
Are we able to prioritize any of the danger
But like I
points?
said, that's what
Yeah, that's
Eric's
something we'll be
team will be doing
Yeah.
moving forward. They're going to,
You guys, and I'm sure there's property owners. City's well aware of areas of concern where it's kind of, near Walsh at the downstream, kind of scoured out. But we'll go down through that, and like we said, some of the next considerations are going to be, how much is it going to cost? Construction costs up of it. It's this very unique construction in the fact that it's very limited access. It's a little bit harder to actually get in your construction costs because we have cost books and things and ways to estimate construction costs. But when you're in a tight considerations like this, it's kind of like, okay, what type of actually productivity are they going to get and how is it?
so the other aspect that we didn't mention is that as these solutions are developed, we are having these conversations with you, but we also have to talk to 100 property owners, right? To tell them what's happening or what's being planned for their property. So that's the other aspect of it. So that also includes a bit of time.
Now, this second project is on the school. what we do upstream has got to affect the school project, and the
Yeah.
whole school was flooded.
Yeah,
These 100-year floods are coming. So there's a lot, I feel personally a lot of pressure to make sure we get solutions happening sooner rather than later.
yeah. So
They have real life stuff.
I'm going to say that our goal with this project is to restore the channel without really increasing the speed of water as it comes through. So though we are planning to fix the channel, our intent is not to exacerbate anything downstream.
Will
Okay?
we be slowing it? Is part of our goal to slow it or not?
Potentially, depending on the solution, it might slow down a little bit, but with the amount of water that we're talking about, it's not going to slow down that much. But once we get confirmation from FEMA about funding for the other project, we're ready to jump on it. And not that I want to jump the gun, but with all the work that these guys have done, it kind of dovetails nicely into that project. Again, there's going to be some political, as solutions are developed, political conversations with the school district as to what feasibly can be implemented. So I think we did our last submittal for the FEMA stuff. We've gotten a bunch of requests for additional information. I think our last response was probably in late October, and we haven't heard anything back. So we're still waiting for them to tell us, yes, you have the money.
Scary because these are long-term problems, but it's getting more urgent.
Yeah.
It's like, as
So-
more and more 100-year floods are happening, not waiting for another one. Let's put it that way, so.
Okay. Yeah, it's more resilient. So, I mean, you saw the condition in the pictures, the
Oh, yeah.
conditions of the
Yeah, we
channel.
walked it. It was astounding. It's like,
So, all right.
So
seems
I've
to
got a
be
couple
cobbled
questions.
together.
On this slide, it's up here, the green lines are culverts, is that correct?
No,
Green lines are cross sections. So that's where we kind of took a section of the channel.
See.
You gotta,
Yeah,
you're
it's-
trying to, the channel
Yeah.
ends and winds, so it's part of the.
it's
So
basically.
So these are
it's
your
just-
photos.
No.
No.
so-
These are where we took the topo and told the program, like, here's like where the water's coming through. So then it goes through and each point it calculates the
so
water
It feeds
surface.
the water model.
Yeah.
So they created a model of the channel.
Yeah.
And so the way that they do it is they say, okay, we're going to take a picture, a snapshot of what the channel looks like here, what it looks like here, what it looks like here. And so it kind of feeds the model.
Both to determine how much water is flowing at that
How
location
high.
Yeah.
So the amount of water was.
and what the condition of the channel is at that location?
It
That's in the
provided a
model, yeah.
snapshot of what that channel section looks like.
Okay,
Couple
second,
elements that go into it.
there's a couple slides that show that there's been some construction, what looks like in the channel. I don't know. Slides 44 and 45. One looks like a
Oh, you're talking
building.
about the images that were in the attachment.
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Let me.
Oh, you're talking, at the.
He's not talking about your slide deck. He's talking about. the
44 and
attachment.
I have them
45.
on there.
One of them's
Site
got a
45, right? Picture 45?
Set of
Go
stairs.
slide down a couple. Do you have the slides?
I don't think he
Some-
has that final one.
Um,
One of
Anthony,
them got a
can
set
you-
of stairs going down.
Can you open the
Yeah, I have.
attachment? So you're talking about the photos.
Yeah,
So Anthony, if you can open the photo attachment.
Their fishing deck, I guess. Set of stairs going down, fishing deck.
Here,
Oh, yes, that's at the very, very upstream part. So that's, I think right now we're not proposing anything in that section. So
but I'm just saying it looks like that's in the channel.
it is.
And
if
people,
you call it a channel.
that looks like a building in the channel and obviously stairs that give somebody access.
Well, it looks like
pretty
it
nice
was,
stairs.
it might be a deck.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it might be a deck with stairs from the deck that go down into the channel.
Last
Yeah,
page-
that's
last
right.
page.
That's what it looks like.
Uh,
And can people do that?
Page 52 of the packet.
Actually pretty. It's astounding how different it looks at different places.
I can't
Yeah.
complain because my
It's
dad put a
different.
deck over his
So this
back
is the-
slope.
So
but-
I say, I think.
Top of the hill,
the
so they're
purpose
wanted to
of
put something
showing
over
you
the
all those
creek.
photos is to show you that along the length of the channel, it was constructed and is improved in different ways, right? So you have some concrete sections, some sack sections, some rock sections, some natural sections, and then to illustrate a lot of that damage. And so, yes, there are people that
Isn't
have
there,
bridges.
the channel,
Last page.
there's an easement for the
Yes.
entire channel.
Yes.
And can people build into the easement? I don't
They're
think
not, they're
so.
not supposed to build without a permit. I say, since I've been here, we've limited the number of permits that we issue. And it's really going to be restricted to, okay, do they need a utility crossing or something like that? But we typically don't permit structures to be built in there.
That's exactly why I'm asking the question.
So one of the items that we can talk about at a future date as this project moves forward is, are we going to go and enforce and require people to remove things from the channel? That's a conversation that we're happy to have. In the case of that
Oh, wait,
image.
this site right here?
It's the one
No,
before this. This is
Okay, yeah, yeah,
47.
because this is actually a roadway
Yeah.
crossing of it.
So there, he's talking about
The
those.
stairway.
45, yeah.
Yeah,
This one
so
filed.
we don't know right now where the easement line is. Yes, that's in the.
That's part of what Tetra Tech
channel.
is doing, is
So
figuring out
we'll
where the
find
easement.
out.
And then
Yeah.
this location, if you. It's on the presentation.
But
So-
wait, but if you can, while you're still here, if you can go to the slide before this 45
Or-
to
Got a
44.
building.
Yeah, see, that
Yeah.
looks like.
Yeah, so the odds are a structure like that is actually outside of the easement,
Odds are.
okay? The bridge crosses. And we allow that. I mean, that might be a driveway, it might be something else. So that is something that we can permit. Usually when folks come in and ask, well, how close can I build? Our first answer is stay out of the easement and you should be at least 5 feet or so beyond the top of the bank. That's at least our responses right now. This is an older structure. The thing I don't know is, again, where that easement line is. And so that's something that Eric will be plotting in short order so that we'll be able to kind of tell where some of these improvements might be in relation to the easement.
In this area too, the creek's very broad and shallow. I don't think there's actually any. The improvements end after the one on the left, the picture 40. That's kind of like a rock and routed rock.
Yeah, so
rather-
on 44, basically all you have is a rock bottom and more natural sides.
Toward the top or where is
Yes,
that?
yeah,
It's
that's what I was
probably
saying.
Valley.
Has it
It's,
got
I
really
think that's
massive-
Valley.
Very top. So right when it turns on, so right where Valley turns, that first house.
Yeah.
That's the house, that's the 44. And then basically at the end of 44, if you look to the very back of it, that's where this picture was taken. So it's the next house over from that. So it's like, this is the flow coming into this part of the channel. This is at the very upstream end where it's like only technically 200 CFS coming through here. So, and this is a very broad natural area, not very deep, but then it gets a foot or 2 or 3 feet deep in certain areas where it's kind of like shallow section. And there's not much flow in here. This is kind of natural flow
So it's a crick.
before it becomes a creek. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Questions? Nope. I have one more question on that. So Brain is still processing that one where the water had moved significantly. Would that be an opportunity for ponding or if if we're dealing with easement issues and property lines and stuff, is that something where we could negotiate with the property owners to create aquifer recharge opportunities in the channel?
I was gonna say, I don't think we would have necessarily recharge opportunities, but there may be opportunities to soften things and lay things back. But I think our first step in this conversation is figuring out where our property rights are.
Yeah.
And being aware that we will likely have to put everything back within those property rights. We can look at where we may have opportunities where things have eroded sufficiently away that it's like, well, that's part of the creek now.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm wondering, like, instead, be like, your choice, do you want to
But
leave it
we'd
as
also
it?
we'd have to also engage with Mona on those conversations as well.
So, but if a property owner owns part of the creek and wants to retain that ownership, then don't they have some responsibility for managing water flow on their property?
There are some general laws about when you accept, I mean, basically, you can't block water and you have to convey it through your property, right? So if it's coming from upstream, you have to convey it and allow it to go down. But some of these, I'm going to say, are nuanced legal questions that we're going to have to engage with Mona as we get closer to that.
And I think in answer to your question, Madam Vice Mayor, if the property owner owns both sides of the channel and the channel's meandering through their backyard, it's an easier conversation about maybe moving the easement to the channel rather than moving the channel to the easement. But if it's two different property owners and now we're talking about
Yeah,
shifting back and forth, different conversation.
okay, got it.
Okay.
Did we miss any
I
of
think
them?
you got them all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mona, did you have something you needed or wanted to say?
I was just gonna say that it also depends on the nature of the property interest that the underlying property owner has, right? Do they have riparian rights in addition to kind of fee title to the section that attaches to the channel? Is it something different? But we'd have to look at those on an individualized basis. Property owners that do have water traversing their property have to be careful, though, that any of the actions that they're taking are not going to suddenly create runoff in such a way that there's now going to be, and we have to be careful of this too, because if we take some sort of action that causes flooding on a downstream property, there is the potential, exposure for inverse condemnation and so forth. But it's a very complicated legal analysis that is informed by what action did the town take? What action did the property owner take? What type of property interest did they have? How much control did the town have versus another entity versus the property owner? So.
Thank you for your time.
Adjournment.
That's that.